Welcome to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everybody, it's William Harris here. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of this podcast where I feature experts on the direct-to-consumer industry, sharing strategies on how to scale your business and achieve your goals. I'm excited about the guest that I have today here, John Wong. John's been in the retail industry for over 20 years, albeit with a non-traditional career path that has afforded him an expertise that is truly all-encompassing. He's had roles that brought him to Guam, managing travel retail for Coach and Marc Jacobs, had him set up a pop-up store at a Tokyo department store at 5 a.m. at Tory Burch as Director of International, launch a new e-commerce website at East Dane as footwear and accessories buyer, and oversee merchandising, sales, DTC channels for a 60-year-old American heritage brand at Jack Rogers as co-president. What keeps him in the industry is his curiosity and the continuous desire to learn, of which the retail sector is rich with opportunities to do so. John, I'm excited to have you here today.
Thank you, William. I'm excited to join and talk a little bit about wholesale.
Yeah, and I always like to give a little shout out to whoever introduced us. And while he maybe didn't introduce us, I think our mutual connection, I think we just met through LinkedIn, but the mutual connection when I was like, oh, wait a minute, you know him too, was Scott Garber, super smart guy. I actually went to high school with him and somebody that I think is just an all-around good dude, family guy, loves his kids, loves his wife, somebody that I can't say enough good stuff about.
Yeah, Scott was great. I met him at one of my previous companies, and we were looking for a BI tool in particular to help us analyze wholesale sales. And he was at an organization that provided that. But gotta love Scott.
Yes. Before we dive into the meat of the topic today, which we're going to be talking a lot about wholesale versus DTC, which I'm really excited about because nobody's talked about that on the podcast yet before. I do want to announce our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one selling for nearly $800 million, and we were ranked as the 12th fastest growing agency in the world by Adweek. You can learn more on our website at element.com, which is spelled ELUMYNT.com. That said, that's enough of the boring stuff. Let's get into the good stuff. When we're talking wholesale, there's a lot of different things that can mean. And I feel like some people, especially if you're in the D2C world, don't even understand the breadth of what wholesale means. Some of the things you were talking about, it's like an umbrella term, Macy's, but also marketplaces, news services, streaming covers, QVC, outlets. Like when you think of wholesale, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think it evolves and it continues to expand. For me, I would identify wholesale as a channel where the end consumer checks out. The cart and that whole checkout flow is handled by a third party. Sure. And what makes it interesting nowadays is that back 30 years ago, wholesale was pretty much a singular model. You're selling to a department store or a privately owned specialty independent shop. You charge them an X price and they sell it at a Y price. And that's how the world worked. With the introduction of internet, Amazon kind of opening this era of marketplaces and all these other new channels, it's harder to describe. But essentially, a lot of it is where you don't really control a lot of the consumer experience. Sure. The product is provided by you or the service, but after that, your hands are kind of tied. But I think that's where a lot of people are stuck with. That's how traditionally it worked. But now there's so many new models of getting product out there on a platform, at a store that you might not control or own, but gets your product in front of more people. And I think that's what's exciting and requires a lot of nimbleness in our industry and the leaders at these companies in determining which channel goes into it.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense because you need to be where your customers are, and your customers are in all of these other places. And if you're not there, they're finding something else. They're not finding you. They're finding someone else. And that's market share that you're losing. That's opportunity that you're losing. That's lifetime value that you're losing, right? Because you're not even acquiring them in the first place. And so being in these other places, it makes sense to have a strategy there. I was looking at the stats for even e-commerce as a whole compared to total retail sales. And if you look at e-commerce as a whole compared to total retail sales, it only takes up about 15%. That's not that much. Now it's growing fast, but fast might be, another percent this year or something. And so we've got a lot of market share that's out there that, the traditional, let's say DNVBs and direct to consumer, the D2C darlings that are out there have been missing out. And I think they're starting to wake up to that. And I think that's kind of what brought me to one of the discussions that we wanted to get into, which is just wholesale versus D2C. What are the pros? What are the cons? What are some of the things that you're seeing when you think of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, most recently and the most kind of apt example right now is what's going on with Nike. Nike, I would say even pre-pandemic had already made moves. It was a big initial kind of strategy strategy for them to really grow their D2C business, really control their brand. I think it was the right move for them at the time. I think, their distribution might have gotten a little bit too wide. And by bringing it back in, they were able to control it a lot more. And that's the same drumbeat that everyone talks about when, 10 years ago, decades ago, when DTC really started, a lot of people were kind of turned off by the wholesale channel and thought, hey, let's go on our own and really own this whole experience. I think the challenge that's what's going on is that fundamentally you kind of run into a problem because it costs a lot of money to own that whole experience, especially if you are a D2C brand that has taken on capital from venture capital or private equity or any other of the capital markets where they want massive growth. And I think that's where we're stuck on, right? You've got years and years where the capital markets were flooding brands with just tons of cash with the assumption that, 5, 6, 10 years, 15 years down the road, the economics turn and they're just going to have profitability that matches their revenue growth. And I think it's pretty clear that's been very challenging.
Yeah, there was we looked at it from a D2C perspective of let's look at our, CAC to LTV ratios, which is good. And so we were pushing hard on acquisition and running a little bit more in the red. And to your point, that's maybe okay during periods of time for rapid growth, but you end up in an economy like we're in today, and that can bite you pretty badly, especially if you haven't set up some of these other channels to sell your products and make sure that you're there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point because, one thing in one of my previous roles, I was responsible for a multi-channel brand. And what was happening was that as digital marketing got more and more expensive, our ROAS expectations were still held to a pretty high target. And so you just start kind of funneling your budget to that low funnel, that transaction where she or he knows your brand, knows the product, is maybe shopping for the best price or the fastest delivery speed. But then you just choke out and not focus on a future bench of and flow of new customers, right? You haven't really, you start to taking budget away from more brand building initiatives, top of funnel marketing. And that's where it gets, you kind of get stuck. And that's where wholesale, I think, is a great solution. Wholesalers, if you think about it, especially the big guys out there, the Macy's and the Nordstroms of the world, they don't really need to spend a ton of money on brand awareness, right? Everyone knows them. They're literally a household name. There's stores across the country. And so they focus on the really kind of more the middle to the low funnel of the marketing journey. And so I think that is an easy way to really address brand building is having a partner like Nordstrom's and Macy's or Amazon or Walmart or whoever it is that is right for your brand to really get your name out there, right? And I think the other thing is retail stores, right? Along with this whole discussion of DTC, most of them didn't have retail stores in the very beginning, right? That was 100% e-commerce, but I think that value also, no one really understood that true value of actually having a retail space that customers can come in and experience your brand.
Yeah, we're still human beings. We still end up liking online, offline, many different forms of experiences. Let's even say newer experiences, VR experiences. There's very, very few things that are really being done with that in a way that I think is just beyond novel and novel's not the word I'm looking for, but just novelty. Really, it's just for fun, right? And it's not really that beneficial and helpful yet. But you even think about, I was talking with somebody a couple of weeks ago about Tesla was more or less kind of like one of the first D2C disruptors within their space as well. And I think 70% of their transactions and purchases were happening online. And that was a very big shakeup from the rest of the car auto group. And I think what was interesting there is they still have showrooms. They've also just done their showrooms better than everybody else is doing too, where it's like really this experience that you come in and enjoy. And so to your point, there's both of these that need to happen. There's the online, there's the offline. And then there's partnering with other really big people who your customers are already hanging out with. And I think of that like any other partnership that you have in business where, hey, if you want to do something, well, who else is your customer hanging out with? How do you partner with them anyways? It just makes sense from that perspective. What are some of the other benefits?
I think that point when you were mentioning about, kind of being around like brands, like and customers that are looking for that type of product, that is a really great example and kind of characteristic that is impossible to really replicate in D2C, right? And that actually can help you build your brand. Say you're a mid-price brand, but you want to attract upper class customer. Being around brands and a retailer that attracts that customer base is huge, right? And also helps customers that might not know you think, okay, well, hey, they're sitting next to XY brand that I like. I'll take a look at it. And then if you win on better quality, better design, better pricing, then that's a new customer you've captured. And it's so much more lift to do all that on your own, on a website too, which is sometimes it's hard to convey.
It is. What are some of the other benefits? So outside of improving even just, let's say, the P&L side of things and the relationship side of things, what are some other benefits? I think you mentioned like picking and packing. Well, you don't have to do that. Like, what are some of the other like intangible benefits that you most don't even realize are happening as a result of doing something?
I think it goes back to that P&L discussion. And, it was interesting because throughout these last years when D2C was a huge topic from a media perspective, and people were talking about the growth and the revenue, but no one really talked about profitability. No one talked about how much money people were actually making, right? It was just talking about the initial revenue. And so, to that point, the pick and pack, right? You've got, let's just say you've got a DTC brand and your site and you average, say, 1.5 units, right? You are responsible for the pick, pack. If you use a third-party warehouse, average, let's just say $13 to $15 per shipment with that 1.5 unit metrics. Sure. And when on a wholesale perspective, if you are in stores or they pick you up for their website, you are bulk shipping it to that customer, right? So most third-party warehouses, they don't really charge a per unit fee. And if they do, it's significantly less than a e-commerce pick pack. And so that in itself, you're going to save $5-6 on that pick pack fee. You're charging wholesale prices, right? Usually wholesale margins are obviously lower than your retail margins, but that is pretty much consistent, right? It doesn't really change, right? It's kind of say 50% a keystone pricing, then you're getting 50% margin pretty much off the board. And there's no, and then you got your discounts and that sort of thing added in, but it's a fairly stable margin department. You can kind of rely on it from that perspective. And headcount. Let's talk about your office, right? Headcount for wholesale is you don't need a ton. Let's say 3 to 10, depending on the size of the business and how many accounts you have. And if you think about what it takes to support a DTC business, it's significantly larger. Right. And so I think from that perspective, it's a lot easier to be profitable immediately for wholesale. And that's why I think there always will be a place for wholesale for brands. Right. I think Nike, going back to their example, they started, I would say this year, really kind of opening back up wholesale more. They're going back into some of their previous accounts. But if you read about it, there are new agreements, right? They've aligned on store build out, a strategy with them. Most likely it's going to include marketing. So my guess, it sounds like it's kind of following some of the hallmarks that Nike rolled out for their DTC expansion, and they really want to make sure that brand experience is consistent, which is great. I think wholesalers would want that too. But and this is where I think you can really get into this channel and do it in a way that helps alleviate some of the risk that most brands think of when they go to wholesale, mostly loss of control, right? Markdowns, that sort of thing. I think okay.
Well, and that's interesting, right? So there's a lot of benefits, obviously, on the P&L you were talking about. Even there's aggregate benefits, overhead benefits. There's unit economic benefits there. But you bring up some good points. There are some pitfalls that maybe people have been ensnared with in the past. Maybe have even tried it and ran into some issues. If somebody's looking to explore getting into the wholesale game, especially if they're already a D2C market or D2C brand that's doing very well, what are some of those things that they need to be careful about, or make sure they're negotiating, or setting themselves up for success?
I think one of the biggest things that I've ran into whenever I've had this conversation with a team is the margin erosion, especially if you're in a category like kind of that mid-tier fashion and higher up to luxury, where the price is very much tied into the brand value, right? That elevated pricing. And brands spend a lot of effort in really having a tight control over that. Even so, where some brands kind of suggest when you go on markdown. And a lot of times in the past, wholesale would, because of free market laws and price fixing laws that are out there, they try to, but with very little effort, control the pricing that wholesalers sell it to. And so you'd always get to this cycle where, X retailer marked you down by 30%, and then all of a sudden all your other channels have to follow. And that cycle really scared a lot of people, right? And I think sometimes it's hard to work around that. I think that's where you really have to discuss with the partner that you're entering an agreement with, and really make those kind of notions and expectations set in the very beginning. And what is great, if a brand has been 100% D2C, they're going to have a lot easier time than a brand that might have already been or is in the wholesale market. Meaning that if you're in D2C, the market's already clean, if you will, right? The pricing set by your own company, so you don't, and the distribution has been limited just to your own site, so you don't have gray market sellers on Amazon selling you for a discounted price that you have to kind of work around. And so it's going to be easier for those type of brands that have had a greater control. But there's ways around it. If there could be product differentiation, right? If there is an item that, or a certain category or group of product that you can't get around in cleaning up the market because of pricing, then maybe you start looking at developing product that is specific, channel specific. A lot of brands have done that. Mattresses are a famous brand, right? If you ever shop for a mattress, there's not one brand name and model of mattress that usually is in multiple retailers. They're all different. And one of the reasons is so that you can't price match and you can't price shop, right?
Interesting.
XY cloud mattress can't be found at only this one retailer. So you just assume they have the best price. And so
Sure.
there are strategies around that. But I think that's primarily one of them. Margin agreements, I've ran into most of that usually in for fashion. And that's where retailers want to protect themselves, right? If they're bringing in an unknown brand and they might see you in a lot of marketplaces or being sold in a lot of different retailers with pricing that's inconsistent, they also want to protect themselves. Their first kind of goal is to sell, right? Now, if they need to price match so that they are fair and competitive in the market, then they're going to price match, but that's their margin they're losing. And so a lot of times you'll get into discussions where a certain brand might say, hey, I need a guaranteed, I've had 58, I've heard of 59% gross margin. And essentially, if there's any difference in variation from that, you write them a big check at the end of the season.
Wow.
That's scary, right? And I think that also, I know a lot of independent brands decided not to go into wholesale because of that. Now, I'm not quite sure if wholesalers are still doing that. My guess, they probably are, given the challenging environment. But again, there are ways of doing that. And if you are have had a better control over your distribution, then you might not run into that problem either.
Yeah. So let's say that we've convinced people that this makes sense. We've given them the pros, we've given them the cons. What are some practical ways to go about initiating this? Let's say if they wanted to reach out to some retailers, they wanted to start doing some wholesale. What are those companies looking for? Are they looking for, aside from the margins and all of those things, but what makes them makes them excited to bring on a D2C brand and say like, yes, this is the brand that we want to bring on? Are they looking for like social followings, things like that?
Yeah, I would think so. I think, especially if you're in a high, like a collateral category, like footwear, right?
Sure.
There's not a shortage of footwear anywhere to be found. So you most likely have to offer a product, a price point, a characteristic of your product, or your brand that is different from what they have on the floor. And that's where I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for anyone wanting to go into wholesale, is convincing retailers to give you shelf space. And right now, it's going to be really hard. I'm not going to lie. I think most department stores are struggling, and it's going to be challenging for you to convince them to give you one table for a new brand, unproven, doesn't really know what the reach is, what the profitability looks like, and take that table away from a proven brand, right? And I think that's going to be the biggest struggle. I think in the past, one way around that was to go on their digital properties, right? A lot of brands started opening their version of a marketplace. Macy's and Nordstrom come to mind as two of the largest. And when I say marketplace, it's they allow third kind of drop ship, essentially. Yeah. It's not like an Amazon thing where it's more self-service. You still have to go through a buyer. The buyer still selects the product they want on the page, but the drop ship phenomenon is been really one way of getting you onto a wholesale retailer site without that constant negotiation. And I think that's where you can kind of get your foot in the door.
Yep. It gives them an opportunity then to kind of test this out. They say, wait, are we getting sales of this product? And if you start driving sales, then they realize, okay, maybe this is something we want to stock in our actual retail locations.
Yep, exactly. It's a lot easier conversation when you are, reporting and they're seeing 80% sell-throughs, hardly any margin erosion, and return rates are good. And I think that's the other thing about wholesale that I love, and I think is an aspect that people don't think about is kind of information collecting from the customer, right? They have usually they have a larger, wider base. They're national, right? And sometimes DTC brands might not be national; they may be focused on a certain geographical area. And being in a retailer that's that large and has you exposed, you can get data from there, right? One thing was return rates, right? Especially in the apparel and footwear category, where that is a huge struggle for everyone right now. Being able to have a larger base, you can collect more information on what the return rates look like. Typically, return rates are higher in wholesale versus D2C. Right, yeah. D2C usually is a customer that knows you, is a repeat customer, so he or she knows your size or their sizing. Where wholesale, you usually are dealing with a new customer, and so sizing and returns are look different. And I think that's also kind of really compelling to look at as well.
Yeah. So, wholesale, a lot of benefit here. We talked about it even from a profitability P&L standpoint. When you and I first started interacting together online, it was some stuff around just EBITDA and profitability in general. And so if we wanted to shift away from wholesale a little bit and talk about some other P&L things that I've found interesting that you wrote about too, one of those was department P&Ls. And I feel like that's something that does get talked about a lot. When you talk about a department level P&L, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I think it's been something I've been kind of thinking about more and more in how most companies, I'm not saying everyone, but the companies I've worked with look at their different sales channels. For the most part, it's fairly in a silo. Wholesale has their own P&L and all their costs are loaded into this and so on and so forth. But I've been thinking about, does that serve the brand right? Does that serve how the customers look at you? Customers don't look at you wholesale versus D2C. And so why should you be operating that way? Even your merchants, right? The merchants, the buyers, whoever is the decision on the product that they're selling and the price that they're selling, tend to usually look at data by sales channel. And I think that's where I think it's our industry needs to shift that a little bit. Marketing is a perfect example. Every channel has marketing opportunities. If you are a multi-brand or multi-channel brand, you usually have a marketing budget just for your DTC, and then you might have a marketing budget for wholesale. Some people call it dilution, some people call it co-op, whatever it is. It's usually an expense line on someone's wholesale P&L. But very most likely, the wholesale marketing is really handled by the wholesale team. The account executives and their leadership there decide on, what emails they want to sign up on, what Christmas books they want to be in on, what homepage placement they want to be on. Usually, it's with very little involvement with the D2C partners, the partners that are doing marketing for the D2C channels, and that doesn't really make sense, right? Why would you have media, half of the company's media being handled and managed by someone that isn't overseeing the whole brand's media, right? And I think that's where I think with that change, if we changed marketing that perspective and really took, say, marketing all channels to be managed by one team, you can kind of start thinking about how that will evolve, right? If you are doing, say, a big push on a new handbag that you've got created, right? You want that to hit on every channel. And not a lot of brands do that very well. But then to follow that journey through, you want the packaging to be the same across all channels. You want the sales analysis and everything to be all inclusive as well. And so I think there is an opportunity for us to kind of step back and for brands to step back and take a look at some of those things and not really silo those channels, because that's not how the customers shop. That's not how I personally shop. And so I think that's where some of it gets lost.
One of the things that I like to do is try to explain things with visualizations or whatever. And when you were explaining this, it kind of reminded me of things operating in silos. My daughters are playing softball now, which is really fun. 13, 10, and 7, but the 13-year-old's not, but the 10 and 7-year-old are. And it's like if they were going to go try to catch the ball and let's say that my right hand is wholesale and my left hand is D2C, and both of these are operating independently, and they both go to try to catch the ball at the same time. And it's like, wait a minute, I thought I was going to do it. And it's like, well, I wanted to do it. Well, it's like, well, I didn't want to move at this point. It's like, it becomes very confusing. Or if I use my hands because I was going to use my feet, but I can't show my feet here. But it's the idea that it's like, if you're trying to run and it's like the left leg wants to move at the same time the right leg, it's like, no, you have to do these things, together as a team as opposed to operating independently. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening, to your point. And we see this very often, even within the advertising budget, which is where we come in. And one of the ways that we try to help rectify this is reminding brands that, let's say that you are a D2C company that also now has Amazon, that also has some retail stuff. You just got it at Target or something. And we'll do holdout tests there as well. So we can say, well, this might be, for instance, within Facebook, it might be optimized for purchase. So we're optimizing it to make sure that it actually drives a purchase on your D2C website. But if we look at this spend in a geo holdout test, we'll see that it has a significant impact on your Amazon sales in that geographic region and in your retail sales in that geographic region as well. And we need to understand how much is that total impact of what we're doing. Even though we have a goal, a targeting goal or an optimization goal for the website, it's impacting these other things. And the vice versa is also true. If we're running let's say maybe it's a coupon for people to come into your retail location that weekend. It's Memorial Day sale or whatever this is, and you're running this coupon and you're trying to get people there. That also still drives purchases on the website, even though you're literally telling people to go to the store. And so understanding how these work together, that they're not siloed and they need to be evaluated more in an aggregate way. One of the ways that we look at this then is we just have like an enterprise MER or an enterprise CAC. We talk about that as being like the roll up of all of this blended together. How is that being impacted, and is that moving in the right direction?
Yeah, and you know what? That brings up a good question. You're talking about and how Element would take a look and maybe look at it from an enterprise level. There are certain retailers. Top of mind is Amazon, right? They're building a giant advertising platform on or off the Amazon site. And are you seeing them kind of provide you the analysis and kind of that Google Analytics type of data that a company like yours would want from a platform?
I mean, they have some data. Is it what I want? It's better than you get from a lot of other, let's just say, like if I was going to lump Amazon into anything not D2C, I certainly can get more data there than I typically would get from Target, for instance. Now, to be fair, I don't get the data from Target. The data from Target's going to go to my customer, and then my customer is going to share whatever parts of that they want with me. And so I can't say for a fact that Target isn't sending enough data, but I will say that typically I just get access as a company. We get access to their Amazon account, and we can see significantly more data, which is helpful from an analysis standpoint. But at the most basic level, when we're talking about even running these holdout tests from a geographic perspective, I just need to almost know sales by date. And if I could get sales by date, then I can see if I start this holdout test, am I getting, and I would just say sales by SKU by date. For the most part, that gives me enough to understand whether or not what we're doing is impacting something there.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And I don't know, I guess whoever finds that solve in the marketing world is going to be very wealthy.
Absolutely.
Because it's got to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a subject matter expert on marketing, but a lot of marketing attributions digitally is still on the last touch part, right? Of where the customer kind of last engaged. A lot of big companies still go off of last touch. They're doing something, whatever their ERP says or something. There's a lot of them that are getting better with some of those models now as well. We like to use a blend of a lot of different data points. And so at a high level, parts of what we're looking at would just be, what does Google Analytics say about this? What does the platform say about this? What does your actual like bank account data say about this? And for this, it's like your customer data profile or whatever this might be, that we're getting the information of the actual orders and what's going on there. And then also, what does your post-purchase survey data say? And you kind of blend all of these to put together. And the best way that I describe this is it's three-dimensional
data, but then I go a level beyond and I call it 4-dimensional data because I've got to add in the time dimension. But what I should see here is there should be a picture that you could only see in 3 dimensions. If you try to flatten that at all, you miss it. And the way that I like to look at this is an X-ray. If you take a 2-dimensional view of a broken wrist, you won't understand what that break really looks like unless you take a couple of different views of that. And I think the same thing is true for any type of data, whether you're looking at last click, first click, any kind of touch, even when we're doing the holdout tests to see what the actual incremental difference is there. All of those still play a role in understanding what's actually taking place. And any one of those in and of itself is absolutely true, just like any one view of that X-ray is absolutely true, but it's absolutely incomplete as well. And so without the other views, you're going to misunderstand what's going on, any kind of flattening of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that makes complete sense and shows how challenging it is to be a marketer nowadays, because the data's there, but there's a lot of, I guess, post analysis and kind of attribution that needs to happen.
Yeah, and I think it can be visualized 3-dimensionally. And I will say that I actually have started working with Scott's team on a couple of things on how to visualize the data in 3 dimensions and then 4th dimension with time. But there's actually some things that I've been doing with quaternions that actually get into 4th dimensional math that I think help us visualize this even a little bit better. And just like intuitively, you can look at something and say, that's the same shape. Right. Instead of just looking at this saying that it's like no. If as long as that shape stays the same as your scaling or whatever, then it's different. But if that shape morphs or turns or twists, then you know that something is becoming skewed. Something is changing then within that shape. And I think that makes it bounces off. Exactly.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, I think that, it echoes kind of what we've been saying all along. I think there is a way that wholesale, or there should be a way to look at wholesale marketing as part of that whole strategy.
Yeah, it has to be, because like you said, that your customers are shopping. They're not differentiating when they're shopping. So
yeah. And it's interesting. The other channels that are out there for wholesale is QVC, and kind of that home shopping, home media category had a bit of a uptick during COVID, right? Everyone was staying at home. These channels in the past traditionally tended to be a little bit older. I believe they skew a little bit more female led, but they're starting and trying new things. I know QVC's parent company is jumping into live streaming, right? Which has been a lot of people have tried live streaming. Amazon tried it, Instagram, Facebook, everyone's tried it, but I don't think the success has been where it was or where they expected it to be compared to what China has seen with live shopping, right? They can do an hour and bring in a couple $1 million in GMV. But I think that's interesting, right? Because that is, think about the millions of impressions that might be seeing your product. And that's where I think that's another thing that I think most leaders should take a look at for a new opportunity. Right, QVC might not, or these platforms might not be exactly your customer base, and but the impressions there, right? That 1 hour show that you can be included on, you just got your product, flashed in front of a captive audience for an hour or 15 minutes, and I mean, that's millions of dollars of media impression that is hard to make up, right? And so if anybody can crack the code, I think that it would be like the QVCs and the HSNs of the world, because we're seeing that this has worked well even on some social media platforms where there was a tool called Comment Sold. I know that Facebook and Instagram have both decided to do this themselves as well, where you basically just go live on the platform and people just comment, yep, sold medium. That's all they have to say, and it automatically routes it as a purchase. And so it's very similar to like what was going on with QVC and Home Shopping Network, but it was just on the social platform. And so I think that we've seen that this has worked fairly well even on the social platforms. But I think that, to your point, like in an even larger level, I think that there's something still that could be unlocked there with QVC Home Shopping Network, somebody like that can make a bigger splash with that. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's so many things that it kind of addresses, especially fit or trust of a new brand. And
Mm-hmm.
regardless of if you know the host that's doing the stream or not, having someone kind of actually walk you through the product, the same interaction you might get in a physical store, but now there's a path of providing that same experience. I can see it being very a great channel to get, especially for new brands.
You know what I like? Okay, so this just opened up something that I hadn't thought about until right this moment. So I also really like VR, and I've invested in a VR company up in Toronto called Allegory that I'm really excited about. Actually, the former head of VR at Wayfair is the CTO there. Really interesting company, but. So let's imagine this. Google also just launched their AI. And when I say just launched, by the time this goes live, it might be several months from now. So I have to be careful about saying just launched. But when we're recording this, they just launched this AI tool where you can view a particular dress or something on like 100 or a million, I don't even know how many different model types, body types. So you can see almost what does it look like on you for the most part, right? But we're also seeing that you can superimpose basically your avatar, your body type now on a lot of other things within the VR world. So let's just say, a couple of years from now, I don't think that it's that difficult to almost see that QVC model. But then it's, instead of it being that model, they just instantly, in fact, Wonder Dynamics has what's called Wonder Studio, where they can, you basically just click on the face of a character that you recorded in video, and it will CGI a completely different character in there if you want, which is absolutely wild. I mean, it's like almost like mindlessly do it. So it's not going to be that hard to basically say, you're just like, hey, John, you're looking at this shirt. You want to know if it's going to fit you and how you like it on you. And so rather than you seeing it on a model that's maybe like you, it's your dimensions, it's your face, it's your body, it is your complexion, it is everything about you. And it's that model now, basically modeling the clothes for you. And it can still be recorded by like this QVC person, just going through, talking about it, showing how it, the fringe or whatever, right? Like all of those things, but it's you.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild to think about, but the possibilities are endless there, right? And I think most people were talking about the VR, and it was more about avatars that live online, but not a lot of people are talking about how that can impact real life clothing and your personality and that experience. So yeah, I mean, it is very interesting. Hopefully that it gets over the hurdle. I know that I don't know what your experience, but I've shopped at plenty of sites that have like a sizing tool. They help you.
Yeah.
There's a couple of platforms that are cross brand. So if you have a profile on this site, it'll follow you or should follow you. But I would say my success rate on those is about 60%. Sometimes
that feels higher than a lot of others. Yeah. It's higher than I probably would have said. Yeah.
I mean, because I think a lot of that relies on data, right?
Absolutely.
Those models, and it's, what I found, and I'm making massive assumptions here, but a lot of it is, especially if it's a marketplace or like a retailer that sells product that they don't make themselves, a lot of it, that requires the actual pattern, the dimensions of the pattern of how the product is cut if it's an apparel item, and that needs to be properly provided to the retailer, and someone at the retailer needs to properly upload that to the sizing system. I've worked at plenty of companies to know that is not that simple. Most people don't know what they're looking at. They don't know what their shoulder width versus their waist width and all that. And so I think having this kind of VR tool, maybe that can kind of circumvent a lot of that, because it doesn't require as many data inputs. Especially for a customer, right? Hopefully it's some kind of like scanning kind of method where it scans you with the VR goggles. But it's, I mean, that's another solve that someone needs to address.
Yes, it's coming, right? Like Apple's Vision Pro is Apple's Vision Pro is wild. If you've seen the Kodak avatar that Facebook has developed, it's you. It's literally you. It's absolutely wild. I could talk about this for another 5 hours with you, but I want to shift because I want to get into also who is John Wong, and I always like getting into the person of who you are. And so one of the first questions I wanted to ask you is just about your childhood. What shaped you to make you who you are today? The person that was able to do all of those things we listed in your bio. I mean, you've done so many different things. You seem to be able to just jump into any situation and find success in it. Why?
That's a good question. My childhood was, I guess, a very kind of traditional or similar to a lot of immigrant families. My mom and dad actually met in Portland, Oregon. That's where I was born and raised. But they had just immigrated from Hong Kong a couple years before that, and so they met in Portland, and they had me, and so my brother and I were the first generation in the States, and I am one of the handful of people that actually went and finished college and got a bachelor's degree. And so cool. I think, it was a combination of living that immigrant experience. My dad spoke fairly broken English, has a high school equivalent degree, but he kind of worked his way up in Chinese restaurants, as most people did back in the 70s and 60s. And so he saved enough money. And by the time I was 15, they opened their first restaurant. And so I was there, every weekend. My brother and I were just sitting at the restaurant, either helping them out or doing our homework. That was our downtime. And so I think seeing that helped kind of guide me into business, kind of seeing the benefits of that. I think I always had an entrepreneurial spirit, but I probably might have missed it in my life in terms of doing something on my own. But I think a lot of that has also brought in some curiosity, right? My family and my parents were just focused on feeding my brother and I and going to work. We didn't have a lot of time for vacations and museums and kind of those other extra activities that families usually did. We didn't have time for that. And so I think because of that, though, I just became curious on my own, right? I had to learn about certain things myself, and kind of a lot of it was motivated. And so that carried into college, and I studied psychology. I did not want to be a psychologist, but I was curious about it. I liked people. I like learning about human behavior and how sometimes weird it is. And then fell into retail. I went to Santa Clara University. They have a great retail studies minor. And so I did that. And I thought that was a really good balance, right? I didn't want to go 100% into to get a business degree, but I knew I liked it enough to do something around business and that sort of thing. And so that minor helped kind of open my my path into retail. I think it's been great. I love doing what I do, but a lot of it is because I've always challenged myself to do something different, right? As you mentioned in that great intro, I've done a little bit of everything, and it's a non-traditional path for a lot of people in the industry. But I've got to learn about so many different things, right? I think my second job was at Coach, and I remember 2 months into the job, I was in Guam, the island of Guam. Most people don't even know where Guam is, and I was there in my jeans, and I was there looking at we had 3 retail stores in the island of Guam, if you think about it. Wow. And so I learned about international business. I learned about travel retail, right? And that's because I was the reason why I was on Guam is because travel retail, and that's another part of the industry that not a lot of American retailers know about, because it's fairly, our experience with it, if you travel within the U.S. or depart from the U.S. airports, it's mostly liquor, tobacco, makeup, right? But abroad, mostly in Asia, initially, and now pretty much around the world, there was a huge business in people wanting to shop when they travel, and especially places that had really high VAT, or because of luxury pricing strategies, they were paying significantly higher prices. And so I learned about that. I was a little Asian boy from Portland, Oregon. Why was I in Guam? And so I think that has kept me doing this. And I've always found something interesting, right? I jumped in. I had never done buying. I really wanted to do buying. Got a chance to join Shopbop when they were launching the East Dane site. And that was really fun. And so, I think it's kept me engaged. It is a fun product to work on. It's not life and death. It is everyone. It's universal, right? Everyone wears clothes. Everyone needs something in their closet, and so that's been kind of kept me going.
I love it. Curiosity, hard work, right? Like these are two of the top qualities I think of anybody that does that. You strike me as somebody who's also routined. How do you stay sane with all of the crazy things that you've done? Like there has to be some kind of a routine that you've established for yourself.
Yeah, I have. It's, my friends have made fun of me for it. It's
nothing to make fun of. That's a good thing.
It's what's worked for me. And, I've kept pretty much, I have hours of, say, from 5:30, 5 a.m. to about 6 p.m. I kind of have a routine. I always wake up very early. I go to the gym, have breakfast, and then I start getting into work. But my bedtime never changes, and my wake up time never changes, and that's helped kind of stabilize me. And what's weird or interesting is I kept that even when I'm not working. I'm in between things right now. I'm looking for an opportunity, but I've kept that. I'm still waking up at 5:30, 5 a.m. To go to the gym, but I think that helps center me.
I think it's important, right? There's more and more studies that are showing the importance of our circadian rhythm. And even on days off, maintaining that circadian rhythm, that your body can rely on certain things. And I've even seen studies that suggest, like you said, like the bedtime, that it's like we need to minimize the distractions that we have within our bedroom. That it's like the bedroom is like this, place for sleep and rest. Not having a TV in there and things like that allow your brain to think, oh, this is not the place where I rest. Where it should almost, Pavlovian like condition you, that it's like you step foot in that bedroom and you're like, I'm ready for bed. I'm ready to go to sleep.
Yeah. The weird thing is I break all those rules. I have a giant TV in my bedroom. I have my phone, and everything's in the room. But I think that routine, though, has helped. The time, like when I see the clock and it's getting close to 9:30, 10 o'clock, I'm like, okay, it's time to go to bed.
Yeah. Something else you were talking about here when we were chatting before was health things.
Yeah.
And, we can sometimes have health issues that pop up from time to time in our lives. And there's something that you've been kind of working through here as well, that you were willing to share. Take me through that.
Yeah, I had in the middle of the pandemic, as with most people that were going through it, I was under a lot of stress. I developed high blood pressure. I had Bell's palsy. They didn't say that it was directly tied to stress, but stress is a major factor in that. I was grinding my teeth. I started having to inject Botox in my jaw to weaken the jaw muscle, and I have to wear 2 night guards. So something was going wrong. And so I decided to kind of take a break from my last role. But then halfway through, I also had a little bit of a heart, what do they call it? A heart arrhythmia. Those stories that Apple loves to tell when the Apple Watch and you get an alert on your Apple Watch. I had that. And so that kind of freaked me out. And I'm good now. But, part of that was really taking things seriously. I've always been overweight my whole life. It's definitely genetic. But there are definitely things that I probably could have done better. And my cardiologist suggested a whole food plant-based diet. That was overwhelming that day. I didn't know what it was. I've never heard of it, but essentially, it's not veganism. It's essentially trying to eat food that is not altered or there's not a lot added to it or taken away from it. And so since I started that, I lost over 30 pounds. My numbers look, cholesterol dropped by 50%, and all these numbers look good, and I feel great. But you know, I started there thinking, I'm 42 when all this happened. I've had a struggle with my weight my whole life. What would my life have looked like if I knew about this 20 years ago? Yeah. You know, or even, you know, when I was just a teenager and learning how to eat. I think, you know, my life might have changed a little bit, might have been a little bit different, but it's about kind of finding what's right for you. You know, I think this diet definitely, I'm not going to call it a diet, it's just the way of eating has definitely surprised me. You know, I didn't think I was eating unhealthy. You know, I was following a pretty mindful kind of diet, but so it wasn't a huge change for me, but it kind of, whatever it did, my body needed it. And so that's been really interesting. And weirdly enough, now there's been a lot of dialogue and conversations about what they call ultra processed foods. Sure. Right? There's this great doctor in the UK who's coming out with a book called Ultra Processed People. And he's the one, a couple years ago, I think went on a diet of McDonald's for a month or 2 weeks or something like that. And he recorded himself. Similar to, the other guy that did the similar thing.
Supersize Me or whatever.
Yeah. Similar thing. And but this particular author was a doctor, and he looked at it from a medical perspective, and so there's been a lot of conversations about what we eat, or what is it, food as medicine, right? That's kind of this new buzzword, and you know, you start thinking about how we're trained on a lot of our eating habits, right? What was it the other day? Oh, I was visiting my parents, and they know about this diet, and they were trying to cook dinner, and they made chicken. And I was like, oh, we made chicken. I was like, oh, I can't eat that. Like, well, chicken's not meat. I was like, no, chicken's meat. They thought meat meant beef. Like, sure. They're not the only ones that made that correlation. Right. And I find that fascinating. That most people, when they say meat, they just think of red meat. They don't think of fish and chicken and poultry and all the other things. But it's been kind of mind changing or life changing, this whole diet. And it's worked for me. I'm content. I'm never hungry. But yeah, that has been a life change.
I think the thing that I like about what you were saying there too is just this idea of whole foods in general. We think that sometimes we're so smart that we can outsmart biology, right? And so it's like we've got thousands of years of developing not just our own cells being used to like real foods that just existed out in nature, but all of the cells that are contained within us. And I forget the exact figure, but I think I've seen something like 90% of the cells that make up who you are not even human. They're like bacteria and viruses and all of these things that are inside of us that are on our skin, it's this ecosystem, right? And all of these things have existed for thousands of years on real plant-based and whatever foods out there, not processed foods. And then we come in and we say, hey, well, as long as you're getting enough vitamin C, D, and A, you're okay, right? And it's like, well, maybe there's these other things that we just are completely ignoring. There's a chemical I remember seeing called, I think it's called apogenin or something, right? And it's this thing that causes apoptosis or cell death in cancerous cells that's found in celery. In celery, you think there's nothing there. There's no calories. There's literally nothing. There's like no vitamins or minerals. Like it's just like celery. It's just zero. You look at the nutrition facts, it's just zero everything. But there's all these other chemicals that we maybe don't even have names for every little compound that exists within it. But we know that these things cause these things that are beneficial to us. Now we're starting to learn that. And we got away from a lot of it. And so I think that's really cool that you've kind of gone down this path and that you're seeing this result.
Yeah, I hope I'm on the right path, right? 10 years ago, I was trying, Atkins, right? That was the buzzword. It was carbohydrates are the evil and the devil. And so I was trying that, and all the science talk supported it at that time. I thought I was doing the right thing. I lost a little bit of weight, but the mood swings I had were fierce. And so this time around, I don't have that. I am trying to listen to logic here. I don't have cravings anymore on this. I'm always content, and meaning like I'm not hungry. I feel good. I have a lot of energy. I'm not lethargic. And so based on those things, this is definitely a lot more successful of a diet, if you will, than anything else I've tried. But who knows? Maybe 5 years from now, they're going to say, not having meat is going to cause brain damage. but yeah, I think logically it makes sense. And the good thing on this is I do allow meat. I'm just very careful. The type of meat I eat and when I eat it and how much, right? So I try to save that for really like when I go out, and that's the other thing about the social aspect of this. I didn't expect it to impact socially. A lot of people, when I go out, they're sympathetic and they want to support me. But finding a restaurant that adheres to this is almost impossible. And so that does impact that a little bit. Our system, especially here in New York, it's about grabbing a drink, grabbing a bite, having dinner, lunch, brunch, whatever it is. There's always food involved. And so I just, you have to do a little bit more planning from that perspective. But it's worked for me. And so and hopefully it kind of circumvents future issues as well.
I think that's the key. It's just like even within marketing, right? Where you say, hey, maybe one brand is finding wild success on TikTok, but another brand isn't going to. And it's like, it doesn't mean that TikTok is wrong. It's just not right for that brand. And so, this diet might be perfect for you. Atkins might be perfect for somebody else. And that's okay. Go on it, use some data, study it, see how you're feeling. How do you feel? Are you losing the weight you want to weigh? Are you gaining the weight that you need to gain? Are you mentally sharp? And using that and, obviously working with your doctor to make sure your numbers are where they need to be and stuff. And just, I think there's a lot of truth to the idea that it might be something different for each person, but find what's working for you.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of this advice that I've been trying to give to anyone that asks me for advice, especially the younger people, is trust your gut. I think for me anyways, and I can't speak for other people, but over the years, I, for some reason, didn't trust that. I trusted what I was told, either from someone I knew, something I read, something I heard, and they quote numbers. Usually it's like numbers and facts and like this many grams of this and that sort of thing. And we started kind of getting away from trusting our instincts, and all of us are born with that instinct. And so just go with it. If something doesn't feel right, okay, well, maybe there's something there, right? And try to find out what it is. And that's in life too, right? If it's a job, a significant like a partner, or whatever social situation you're in, if it doesn't feel right and if it makes you uncomfortable, then there's something there. Listen to that.
I'm going to sound like a hippie here, but I promise this is much more scientific than it really sounds. I really like where you're going with about trusting your gut. We're just now starting to uncover the science. I just think science hasn't caught up to a whole lot, but we're just starting to uncover a lot of science about, there's as many neurotransmitters in your gut as there is in your brain. That's massive. That I don't think we even understood that even, a couple decades ago. But let's go beyond this. I really like, I'm a big fan of string theory. And for like quick primer for people, you can quantumly entangle atoms and the data can transfer between atoms that are quantumly entangled, despite the distance in time or space. And so this is a wild phenomenon. But let's imagine they're connected by these one-dimensional strings. Is more or less kind of like this idea of string theory, is that things are connected through one-dimensional strings. But let's imagine that this is true. Let's imagine that some of these things that we might feel are gut instincts might be vibrations that we just don't even know how to process here. We only know how to process in our stomach, that are vibrations of things that are quantumly entangled to other things that are going on within the universe. Like I said, it sounds maybe very metaphysical hippie, but I'm simply saying I just don't think science has caught up to understanding why sometimes our gut is right and our brain just doesn't know how to process that.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever had an experience, or have you noticed that, maybe an experience you had when you were a kid, when you were a teenager, when you look back on it, you're like, oh, that is not my perception of it now as an adult, right? Yeah. And it's a perfect example. Maybe science hasn't caught up, like you said. Maybe we don't know how to interpret this signal or this feeling. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's a lot of unknown. But I think what's worked is just kind of trust my own instincts.
Yeah, that's very smart. John, I've had an amazing time talking to you today. We've gone on some really fun tangents, but I think we covered some really deep stuff for DTC and wholesale as well. If people wanted to work with you or follow you or connect with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Probably through LinkedIn. I'm up there. I know my name is fairly generic in terms of Asian names out there, but it's John Wong, and I have my photo up there, so people can, and all my contact information is on the profile.
We can link to it in the show notes as well. I share a similar thing with you. William Harris, as far as names go, is about a dime a dozen, and so there's 800 million of us out there in the world. John, it's been absolutely.
Yours isn't on the no-fly list. Mine is.
Well, yeah, okay. So, quick tangent before we end that. I was on the no-fly list for a period of time as well. I remember getting to the airport one time, maybe when I was shortly outside of college, and being told I couldn't fly, and I was like, "Why?" And they were like, "Well, you're on the no-fly list." And I was like, "I don't think that's me. I think that's somebody else with my name." But you said you're on the no-fly list right now?
No. I don't think so. But this, post 9/11, I was stopped every time I went into the airport, and I was traveling internationally at that time, and so I think maybe that elevated it. And it's because I don't have a middle name. And so remember, there was a couple of agents and Homeland Security people that are like, you're not the only one that runs into this, but we would suggest you just make up a middle name and then get it registered on your passport and that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm but it's John Wong is like, I don't know, Bill Smith or something.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. So my middle name has saved me a couple of times. And this was maybe not even that long ago, maybe 6 months ago. I remember getting pulled over by a police officer. And I was not speeding or anything. I was actually pulling out of the bank. But after I went through the bank, I went through the I'm drawing a blank on what you even call it, where you just get the cash from the teller. You just drive the drive-through. Thank you.
Drive-through. Yeah.
Yeah. Duh. I'll get there eventually. And so I went through the drive-through, and then as soon as I get out, there's little parking spots, and I'm like, okay, great. I'm putting my money in my wallet. And then after I do that, then I pull out. Well, apparently at that time, a police officer came in. And they pulled me over, and he was like, you took out of the parking lot as soon as I came in. Is there a reason why? And I was like, I just got done putting my money in my wallet. Like, nothing there, right? Runs my plates, sees my name's William Harris, and he goes, "We actually have a warrant for your arrest." I was like, I don't think that's me, but I mean, what's going on, right? And so I just remember them, running things, and I was there for a while, and eventually they were like, "Yeah, you're right. It was the wrong Will Harris. You're good to go," kind of thing. But I can share in some of your sympathy there with the name thing.
You were going to have a Black Mirror episode live out in real life.
Right. It's not me. You got the wrong guy.
Promise. I didn't do it.
Anyways. All right. That was a fun last minute tangent. Yeah. John, thank you for coming out, joining us, sharing your knowledge, your time, and your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, William. It was a pleasure.
And thank you everybody else for joining in. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.